anyone ever encouraged you to share your story, maybe to write a book? Well, if so, you're going to really enjoy the episode today. My guest today is Heather Deffenbaugh, and Heather has lived a life worth telling a story about. She had so many people through the years encourage her to put her story down on paper and publish her book. And I'm so happy that I can share with you that today she is a best-selling author, and her book is called From Ashes to Beauty: How a Child of Two Mentally Ill Parents Went from Surviving to Thriving. It's a memoir. It is a deep dive into a roller coaster life, and it is about surviving, it is about thriving, and it's a message of hope. I can't wait for you to hear more. So I'm going to stop there and just invite you to listen in as Heather Deffenbaugh shares her story. Heather, welcome to It Just Takes One. So great to have you here.
Thank you. So great to be here with you.
In the time that we worked on your book, I kept envisioning this moment where you've published, you've become a best-selling author, and you and I finally get to sit down and share what this entire process has been. Can you believe we're finally here?
I can't believe it. It's kind of a surreal moment. Though I kept keeping the faith, like this is going to happen eventually, but no, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. We've got to dive in. We've got to share what we've been through, because you and I have been through a journey getting this story written and this beautiful, beautiful book published. So let's go back to the beginning and let's remember and share with the audience when we first met. Do you remember that moment?
I remember it very clearly, like it was yesterday.
So share that story for everyone so they can know how we met.
So this was at the IDEA convention, which is an annual, probably world-renowned large convention for the fitness industry. And I've been going for years, 20 plus years, going to these conventions, not consecutively, taking a couple of years off here and there, but going all the time. And the crazy thing was, this was the one time I wasn't going to be able to stay for the full 4 days. And it was also the one time that they cut the expo a little short. They usually open the expo in the morning, all day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I don't think they opened it until the afternoon, which was when I needed to be getting on the road. So I had this impulsive feeling that, okay, just go in there and do a power walk through the expo, because there's always something new or something innovative. There might be that one thing you missed or you want to see. Never in my 20 plus years have I seen a publishing company there. It's usually everything is the latest, fitness gear, fitness equipment, fitness food, just all kinds of different things like that. So at this time as well, from January up until this is in June. So for the prior 6 months, I've been getting the very strong message to write my story in many different ways. Whether it was at church and someone was praying for me and said, I feel like, God is just like telling me like, you need to tell your story. You have something big to share. You need to tell your story. I would get that in my inbox. Have you thought about writing your story? From various, like, how are these people knowing or getting my information? This is crazy. And I talk about that journey a little bit in part 4 of the book. But that day I decided to power walk through, and it seemed like you were right in the middle with a spotlight on you. That's what it seemed like. As I walked, this middle, and I looked up and I'm like, Scriptor Publishing. Is that a publishing company? There's no way, because this is the message I keep getting. I got to walk over there. So I remember walking over, and I think the only one in that moment that had stepped over there. So it was almost like God parted the sea for me to walk over there and just be able to have a conversation with you. I met Greg, I met you, but you and I instantly, as we started having a conversation, that was just, it was so organic and so connected at the same time. That's when you started asking me questions, and I shared my career, my fitness career, what I was passionate about, things I was excited about, and my intention of writing some books on fitness, wellness, with the knowledge I have to share with others. And you asked me a very pivotal question. You said, what do you feel called to write? That was the moment I knew. And I thought, well, this doesn't really have anything to do with fitness per se. I mean, that'll be integrated in there because it was part of my life, but it would be my memoir, my life story. And then I gave you a snippet of it, that I had grown up with two mentally ill parents and raised my brother. And I have this very chaotic, crazy background that would not yield to the kind of person I am today, and my brother, and what we've been able to overcome. And people are like, you can't keep that tucked away. People need to hear that so they can be helped and inspired and encouraged. So that's kind of how it started. And you said, when I told you that, you said, that is what you're going to write first. That first. And I think I needed somebody to tell me that, especially an editor. Yes.
And as we sit here today, the book From Ashes to Beauty has been published. It's a best-selling book on Amazon, available on Amazon. We'll talk more about that as we get into our conversation. But Heather, I've worked with many, 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 many authors over the past 6 years that we've been in business. And if I could encapsulate what I think the quintessential writing experience is, I would tell it through your journey, because I was actually able to be with you every step of the way on the journey, from that moment when you internally made the decision to write this book to today, which is, what are we, 3 years later, 4 years later? I don't remember which year that was.
It was 2019 of June that I met you at the IDEA convention. And then I signed up to be part of your, I forget, manuscript weekend.
Mm-hmm. From dream to manuscript in a weekend. Yes.
Manuscript. That was the very end. I think it was like November 1st and 2nd. First, 2nd, and 3rd. It was a Friday night to a Sunday. And that's when I developed the mind map and began to even birth the process of how I'm going to move forward and create this and birth this incredible book. So I want to say, if we counted from November when we started 2019, it's been 2.5 years, a little over 2.5 years.
2.5 years. I want to read something that you wrote in the book. This is actually toward the end of the book, but you wrote this about this journey you've been on. You said, writing my story has been cathartic and painful, but absolutely worth it. It led me down so many paths, specifically to therapy and on the path to healing. It has changed my life in many ways. My whole attitude and outlook have shifted for the better. My ability to discern how I am feeling and exercise self-control and caution is so much stronger. I trust God at his word more than I did in the past.
Yep, it's accurate.
It has been a process. So tell the audience a little bit more about this cathartic experience that you had. Why was it cathartic? What did it bring out and up in you as you went through the writing of the book?
Well, first of all, it caused me to be incredibly vulnerable, which is not something I've ever allowed myself to be, because I've been in survival mode for so long. So there's a level of control that needs to be maintained, and you create your own safety net, what you're going to allow in, what you're going to share. There's always a heightened concern of how people are going to react or receive things. And really what I learned through therapy is a lot of it is a form of abandonment issues. So people who have been grown up in neglect or abandonment, and it doesn't even have to be as severe as mine. It could be divorce. It could be a lot of different things where it broadsides you, and you feel this intense amount of rejection, or that you're unlovable, or that you have to earn and hustle for people's love or hustle for your worth. And all of that stemmed from, the drastic amount of neglect and abandonment and all kinds of various things, obviously, in the book. So being vulnerable was essential it was 100% necessary for me to speak so deeply from the soul and from the heart, and trust the process that by me sharing these things, it is going to allow everybody else to be vulnerable. That's true connection. That's authenticity. And that's what breaks strongholds. That's what breaks stigmas. And that's what crushes fear. So I had to go through that myself. If I'm telling people, you can do it too, or, I'm sharing my story to inspire people, to show how I came from surviving to thriving. The subtitle is the very essence of the book. It is, how do you go from that space? And how many millions of people right now are stuck and hurting and lonely and feel completely alone and are living a facade. And really, they're isolated in their head and isolated in their heart. And we see an epidemic of suicide. We see an epidemic of mental health issues. We see an epidemic of mental illness, which is another thing I wanted to bring light to, because those two things are actually quite different: mental health issues and mental illness. Mental illness is something that will never go away. It's kind of like diabetes. You have to live with it. You have to manage it. Diabetes, you have to take insulin shots. You have to regulate your blood glucose. Mental illness, you often have to take medication, see a psychiatrist, adapt it because the body adapts to things so quickly. You have to have, really good modalities in therapy, a support system, all of those things, and you can coexist with it. You absolutely can. Like any other kind of debilitating, autoimmune or anything. And I think we need to look at mental illness the same way, because, it's a broken brain. Just like when you have a broken pancreas, or, your lungs aren't working well and you need assistance there. So that was one. Mental health issues, but that's everywhere. That's anxiety, PTSD, complex PTSD, depression, those types of things. And those, you can actually overcome a lot of that. The brain is incredibly pliable, and there's so many amazing therapeutic modalities outside of medication. Not saying that might be something you need. I do not need it, which is a miracle. So,
Yes.
I do not need it. I am not, just so for the record, I'm not on any kind of psychiatric drug to help ground me. I am in therapeutic modalities like, obviously talk therapy. I feel like that is what you and I have every week when we Zoomed, which was a really big part of helping me get through the fear and the distorted thinking, but also obviously being in therapy, and the book catapulted me into therapy. And my therapist and I both agreed that I don't think an hour a week is going to be enough. Especially my motivation was like, whatever it takes to write the book. And I realized what it really was about was I had an enormous amount of healing to do. So, that was the big cathartic process of, and how it changed my life so much, was that really yielding to the call, which I believe, I know in my heart, the call was from the Lord. Like, you're going to write your story. I'm going to help you, and I'm going to send you the people that are going to help you along the way. And in turn, you're going to be helping them in ways that they don't even expect. And that is how I work, through people.
So beautiful. And I love that you brought up that vulnerability piece, because obviously anytime anyone puts something of their own out into the world, whether it's their story, whether it's their piece of art, whether it's a book, whatever it is, there's a vulnerable piece to it. And the more you've been through, the more of those things that you described, the shame, the embarrassment, the humiliation, the fear, and the more of that you feel, the harder it is to sit down and write it. And you described, there's many methods and modalities of going through that healing process: talk therapy, leaning on your faith, for you, music, which I'm sure we'll talk about because it's a big part threaded through the book, but also writing. How do you think, or do you think that the actual process of writing helped you to sort of break open and start to open up to that vulnerability?
Oh, that was huge. And I think knowing that there's different modalities of writing, like you can speak into a microphone, you can do Rev, where you talk it all out and then they'll type it all out for you. And I tried everything. I'm always about try everything available to you and see what resonates with you, see what, really works for me. And the actual typing, the kinesthetic feeling of my fingers on the keyboard, typing away as I'm thinking and processing. And let me tell you, there were so many moments as I'm typing and I am bawling. I'm like I'm crying and I'm typing and I'm like, oh my God. And there's a movie, I think with Diane Keaton where she's writing and she's bawling. And I even had a moment where I thought about that. I'm like, this is real. Like, this is really what happens.
I know the exact movie you're talking about. I think about it often, where she was just sobbing and
she's
typing.
sobbing and she's, it's personal for her, but even though she's writing a screenplay and it's, it's coming from her life, though it's not a memoir or it's not a bibliography or autobiography, I should say, where mine is. So as I'm writing, I found that just the feeling of the keys and typing and then seeing the words displayed in front of me and being able to go back and read those words and then they're impacting me again, then they brought out more. So then I would add more to it. And then sometimes I would take a break or I'd have a thought about something else that I knew, okay, I'm writing part 1, but this is going to go in part 2. I would just create another page, part 2, and get those thoughts out. It was really important that as I felt them, I would get them out. And the other part of my writing process was literally writing, physically writing. So I have, my desk even still, I mean, there's got to be 50 Post-its and little folders and pieces of paper. And it didn't matter where I was. If I just finished teaching a class at the gym and I got in the car and I had this thought, as I had a conversation with somebody, I'd sit down and I'd grab my notepad and I'd start writing it out. And there were times that I would think about it while driving and I would use my voice memo inside my, my phone. I'd turn on that app and I'd speak into it. Okay, you don't want to forget this, da, 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 da. Then I would come home and I'd take that and I'd transfer that into writing and it would develop from there. So I just didn't miss a moment to capture things that were coming up for me and how I was going to express that and verbalize that. So sometimes it would start with a basic sentence and from there I could really expand the thought and attach my heart and soul to it. And then it became this huge paragraph and passage.
Yeah. And it was such a pleasure to go through that entire piece with you because we had coaching calls every week. So we would touch base, we would talk through what you had been thinking about or what you were voice memoing that week or whatever ideas were floating. And then you'd go back to it and keep going. And so it was really amazing for me to be on that journey as you went through each piece of it. I remember, Heather, I remember distinctly, there was one conversation that we had where you were telling a lot of the story, and you said to me, Kelly, I feel like this is becoming all about me, and it doesn't feel right. I don't want this book to be about me, even though it's a memoir, it's my story, but you were kind of stuck in that moment. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I do.
And I want to bring that up because I hear that from a lot of authors, as they start to write their thoughts down, it starts to get a little uncomfortable when it feels like it's all about them. So how did you reframe that? How did you get over that hurdle so that you could continue writing the book?
There was a couple of ways. One of them is something that you said. Another one was something my husband said and something my therapist said, and you were all consistent in what you were saying. So it helped that I was expressing that a little bit because I kept saying, what is my why? Why am I writing this? Who am I writing this for? And I started thinking about my children. And I think you had mentioned that, Dan, my therapist, that all said, it's like, as I want to leave a legacy for my children, my grandchildren, if they were reading this, and how that would help them, allow them to be vulnerable, not feel they had to be perfect, be able to share and work through things that had them in bondage and fear and shame, because everybody's going to go through that at some point with something. And it's, again, I say this in the book trailer, my video trailer, that pain is universal. It's all over the world. We all experience it. So when I started writing from that space, I instead of writing from a childlike space in the beginning where I was kind of vomiting out the thoughts, which you encouraged, which was great. It's a great start. it's like, when I first wrote part one, and I think there's about 10 chapters in part one, I was coming from that space, and I could see some of the phrases like, I can't even believe this happened. And I'm talking as if I'm processing it in therapy or something. So when I went back, and it had been a year and a half had gone by, and I had finished this, that's why I'm like, oh, I'm rewriting this entire part one, because now I really knew my why. And so obviously the bones were still there in the story, but I really was able to get in there and really connect all those chapters so that the reader is feeling that they're almost being spoken to, like, come with me on this. And I know this is going to speak to your soul too. And, in what ways will this impact you, the reader? I started thinking about the person reading it who is very, has been stuffing all those things down. And some people have just read it like, I can't wait to read your story, but then they're having a hard time getting through it because it's tapping into their story. And that is what I wanted to be able to do, is help other people move out of those places and really thrive, because you cannot thrive when you're stuck there. You can't. You kind of think you're fine. Everything is fine. That's why I wrote a chapter called, I'm fine. Yes, I know. We all want to be fine. And I developed an acronym for that. And I won't give too much away. It's in the book. You'll have to read it. But that chapter resonated with a lot of people. And that's been really fun to hear. It's like, oh my gosh, this chapter, when you wrote this, I was like, totally. And I said, that's so great. It's so neat to hear the different ones, because I had the ones that I thought, ooh, this is really going to impact somebody. And then there's been so many other different ones I didn't think would impact people the way it has. So,
and you never know. That's the thing. You never know how it's going to impact somebody. So you just have to get it out and let it do its work. I'm curious though, because that legacy was really important to you. Your why was about leaving that for your kids and the story to pass along to them, and the message of hope and resilience and all
yes.
of that, as well as to the readers. But I'm curious, what does your family say now that they've read it? They all have it in their hand. What did Dan feel when he read it? How did the kids feel? And what did they say about it once they read it?
Oh, that's been really incredible. Especially Dan, my husband, who there were chapters that after he read it, I would be, cooking in the kitchen, and, he would sit down. He couldn't put it down. And he knows the stories in this book, but he said, the way you wrote it, it took him back in that time with me as a child and everything. But then the parts where he doesn't come in until part 3, even though he knew some of the stories that had happened to me, especially as an adolescent, I think that's been the most painful part for people, is part 2 of the book. That's where I'm getting a lot of emotions and tears, and, people wanting to reach out and talk to me. But he would cry. Like there was a chapter one time I was cooking, and he came up and he just grabbed me and hugged me really hard, and there were tears in his eyes. And I'm like, are you okay? What happened? He goes, I just read, Damaged Goods, or I just read this one part, and I just wanted to come hug you. It impacted him that much. There's other stories where, even the chapter 1, A Pocket Full of Pansies, he's just like, oh my gosh, it was like you took me back to the 70s. I was there. And then the music was so impactful. I felt he kept Spotifying every song. So I knew what chapter he was on. I'd hear the song. I'm like, you're on chapter. He really couldn't put it down. He read the whole thing in like 4 days, which is good for my husband, who's not a book reader. He doesn't typically read books. We listen to a lot on Audible. My kids, I'll share a little something personal here. They needed a heads up. We had to sit down around the dinner table, and I had to tell them everything that was in there that they did not know before they opened the book. That was a very difficult moment for me. It was painful. I had to just, because I had to speak it and look in their eyes and see their reaction. But it was the most incredible thing that I could have done. And that was the way to do it. And my husband said the next day, you have just blown open the doors for them to come to you about anything, for them to see your humanity, because they have seen me as Superwoman my whole life. We've created a very wonderful life for them, and they are so loved and they are so cared for. They are also disciplined. You know, they had boundaries, they had all those things, and we didn't do everything perfectly. You know, nobody does, but that's the other beauty about it. You're almost doing your kids a favor when you show them the imperfections, because they now feel like, God, I don't have to be perfect, and my mom's going to understand these things. So I think that was the biggest impact, is that I lived a life much fuller, much more difficult, much bigger than they ever knew. And I think it explains so much about me to them, why I react the way I do, why I have that very tenacious, strong, resilient spirit, why I'm not afraid of much, why I can be a risk taker, why I throw myself in wholeheartedly 200%, why I love hard. That all of these things, you know, why I'm not afraid of confrontation, which in the beginning, pre-therapy, pre this process, the confrontation was a means of an outlet to release all that. Now I'm very discerning, and I can move into confrontation with mutual respect, but also be very, very grounded and bold in what I believe, but deliver it in a way where the other person's really going to listen and they're not scared to death of me. So that's a good thing.
That's a really good thing.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a really great message. Another thing that I do hear from people that are writing is that they're very afraid to share the stories because they don't know how their families will take it. And, you know, whether it's because you're writing something that is bringing them into the story and you don't want to bring them in without their permission, or whether it's what you described, that they're going to find out something they don't know about you. That's probably the deepest of vulnerability, right?
It is the deepest of vulnerability, and it's the largest risk. And, you know, beautiful, wonderful things are not birthed from, you know, carefully calculated, contained, and refraining from. It is risk. I mean, if you look at much things in life, it's because people took the risk to do that. And it wasn't just a blind, let me jump off the cliff. It was such a process. And our Zoom meetings were such a process. So you and I would talk this out. And the more we did, the more comfortable. You were like a sister. I could tell everything to you that was safe. And you always told me, we're always going to go back and look at this before the book is published, Heather. And if you don't want it in the book, we can take it out. So the book became like this in-depth journal, and this in-depth, like journal for me, but also how I'm helping people. Like after I think they're in that story with me, what's the lesson? What's been the incredible life application that I've taken from this? Those kinds of things. You know, I don't just leave you there. Some of the stories, it's just, you need to know the story as we move forward. So they're going to transition into, just so you know, the background of things, and that will come. The whole, you know, how do we thrive from here? That will come. But it was recording our sessions, and I think I didn't start doing that until our first couple of Zoom meetings. When you started saying, oh my goodness, Heather, that was really good what you just said. Write that down. You got to write that down. I'm like, I got to write that down, because I would speak it. Things would come out of me when I speak to another person. So this happens when I speak to friends, or friends who are struggling, or my family, or my husband, or my therapist, or whoever. I speak a lot of things that they're like, wow, what you just said was very powerful. And so I'm like, rather than speaking to Rev, it doesn't come naturally when it's just me and a recording. But when I'm talking to another human being is where it taps into my soul. So I started recording our Zoom meetings, and then I would go and walk my dog and go on these long walks and bawl my eyes out and listen to myself speak, which was difficult in the beginning. I didn't like hearing myself speak. I was hearing my own voice going, ew, I don't like that. And I thought, well, I have a feeling that my book is going to be a catalyst for public speaking, and I will be on a stage, a TED Talks or something. So I need to get used to listening to my voice. And that was actually an amazing process to hear me speak things out. Something powerful happened. I connected to myself. I started having compassion for myself. I started loving myself. I started listening and laughing about some of the things I was saying. I wasn't disassociated from self. I was connecting. And that had not happened prior to writing. That was a very big thing that happened for me, to have compassion on that little girl that went through so much instead of being disgusted by it and ashamed by it and wanting to never let anybody know that side. That's where a lot of the healing began. And that's how I can share it with the world, because I don't have shame attached to it anymore. That's what people are afraid of, to share their story, because you're afraid of how it's going to be received, or how you're going to look, or you've worked really hard to build this facade that you want people to see. But yet you're still living a facade. And how beautiful is it that you can be raw and say, yeah, this was a very big part of my life, as I know other people have had this happen to them. And how beautiful that we can heal from it. And we don't have to lock it up in a big fat chest and shove it 6 feet under and hope that it never gets excavated.
Yeah. You actually brought tears to my eyes as you said that, because I think that's really the essence of what I was thinking when I said you are the quintessential cathartic experience of writing. If somebody really wants to understand what the power of writing and the process that it is, what you just described is it. It is that ability to get back in tune with yourself and to find that compassion. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's all been such a process, and you have to keep moving forward. I wanted to quit writing a dozen times. And that truth needs to be told, that it wasn't like I could just keep going. No, I was going to quit. As a matter of fact, we started this November of 2019, and I was turning 50 on New Year's Day, 2020. And I had told you I had several celebrations in the works, being my 50th, that we were going to New York. We were doing all these different things with friends and family. So I thought, if I could start February 1st, I'll begin then. That's when I'll really throw myself into it. And so I started to do that. And as I started to write, and I kind of went chronologically a little bit, I'm like, all right, I kind of want to open it up with this. And it became, I didn't realize, and I hadn't had any therapy, keep in mind. I had a little bit when 20 years prior, but I talk about that in the book and how it was just scratching the surface. But this began to be so difficult. And as I was writing, it was triggering all kinds of things. And, lo and behold, I found out, of course, I have PTSD, and I have complex PTSD. They're two different things, but lucky me, I've got the buffet. Everything. So it made perfect sense why I would have those things, but I didn't understand that until I started therapy. So as I started writing, it was too painful. So I thought, well, I know I signed a contract and everything. I'm just tell Kelly I'm gonna do a fitness book. We're just gonna change the whole book. I'm not even gonna do this. I had it all planned, and the pandemic hit. That magnified everything, right, for all of us. And we all had to kind of adapt to the pandemic. And you and I hadn't connected for a couple months, and I thought, oh, maybe she forgot about me. maybe I don't know, but I'm just gonna push that, like we all do. I'm gonna just put it on the shelf. I'm going to just put it in the cabinet and just forget about it. How many people run from their stuff until they're held accountable for it, until somebody says, hey, let's have a conversation about this. What's going on? So when you and I connected and you asked me what would be helpful, but we're going to need to Zoom together. We're going to need to have these coaching calls together. Would it be helpful once a month? And you didn't want to push too much, or once a week. And I'm like, probably once a week for a little while to help. And you didn't probably know the magnitude until we started that journey together. So once we started that led me to praying about a therapist. My husband, that was my husband's idea. You need this. This is going to help you too. So, God put a girlfriend in my life who started a nonprofit. I tell that story in the book. And then boom, we went on a walk and I asked her and she referred. And, it turns out it was the perfect match. And I was ready. I was ready to be vulnerable, but also not all therapists are created equal. Not all are a good fit. So I would just speak to that, make sure that people know that if that first one, doesn't seem right and you can't feel vulnerable and you don't feel safe and you can't seem to force it, then it might be time to find another one. Or maybe you need a specific gender. You want a male or you want a female. All those things matter. So you just take the journey until it happens, and mine happened. And then everything started falling into place, between our time together, my time in therapy, my willingness to keep writing, keep moving forward, cry through it, trudge myself through it. There were days that I had 6 hours at my desk in this office. This is the office that has a lot going on in it. Right? You can see multiple computers, sewing machine, this is, you're seeing little facets of me. But that's part of the process. You have to be willing to take the journey in the wilderness and know that you're going to come out on the other side to something very beautiful.
Yeah. And develop the team around you that can help you get there.
That's key. You need a support team for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm sure by now we have completely teased this story enough that we need to share more about your story, because now they know what the writing process was, but the story is really the reason that we're here. And you have quite a story, obviously. So let's dive into it. The book is called From Ashes to Beauty. Let's just start with why that title.
It encompasses my entire life. I was living in a life of ashes. Things were crumbling before me. My father had schizophrenia from when I was born. My parents were high school sweethearts, had a little breakup. My dad got drafted mandatorily in the Vietnam War. He went kicking and screaming. He did not want to go. They married in that time. And then while my mom was pregnant with me, he got an honorable discharge because of schizophrenia, but ended up in a psychiatric ward for about 5 months. And, when they tried to do life together and all the various medications and the psychiatrists that were involved, my mom was also dealing with a tremendous amount of other things. And so I talk about all of that in the book to kind of set the scene of understanding, what I was even born into. But from there was a multitude of things that happened, because growing up in the 70s too, it was kind of like come home and the street lights are on. There wasn't a whole lot of investment happening in a lot of kids. There's a lot of latchkey kids, things like that. And I was all of that, but it started tapping into all of the things that happened to me in that time, from being molested, having sexual abuse, and not from my parents, just to be clear, but, from other people, from people you trust, of course. And the neglect and being bused. I went to 5 elementary schools. 5. You're only in elementary school for 7 years. So being, all over the place like that, there's no stability, the foundation there. And then obviously my mom having her absolute nervous breakdown when I was 11 years old. So at 11, she ended up in and out of psychiatric wards. So virtually, and she did remarry, but my stepdad was, he was not a good man. He was and you read about that in the book, what I had to deal with him as well. So I was on my own. And at 11, there was that point where I had to start caring for my brother. My brother was only 8. And I cared for my brother all the way through the book. And you see that in the beginning journey of even just my relationship with my dad, who has schizophrenia, and the love that was there, and how we bonded. The way that I bonded with my parents, both with mental illness, was music. And music was huge for my dad. It's how we communicated, shared feelings. It's where I saw my parents in a really good mood, in a place of peace. And they were big classic rock fans, so Bob Dylan was like one of their big ones that they loved to share together, but they loved everything from Aerosmith to the Rolling Stones to Pink Floyd was very big, Led Zeppelin, all of these bands. So I grew up listening to this music, and even just Billy Joel and, those types of things too. So all of that music, there was always music on. There was music on in the car. There was music on in the house. I'd wake up Saturday morning. I want to watch cartoons. There was music on. So, but when the music stopped, I knew my parents weren't well. And so the music became a very important connection with them, but also with me understanding my feelings. So throughout the whole book, there's probably about 40 songs in there, many genres. I mean, I've got like 3 Eric Church songs. Eric Church speaks to my soul, because music helped raise him too. So a lot of his music is about how the music impacted him. He's got a song, When Rock and Roll Found Me. It's not in the book, but I related to that one. I was like, oh, but there is a song in the book called Crazy Land. And it is about what the scene looks like in a bar where people are wallowing away their sorrows. And it's the only place they feel connection because they're with other people who are so downtrodden and so sad. And so my dad used to take me in these bars for hours at a time and sit at the bar and, feed us Shirley Temples and quarters to go play Pac-Man. And I was the adult. I was already adulting at that age. So Crazy Land, it shows you what the whole scene looks like. So that's just one little part. And then of course there's songs that people are blown away. It's like the artist wrote that song for my situation. Especially when my mom had a breakdown. Journey has a song called Mother, Father, and it's not a popular mainstream song. It was probably never even got radio play, but it was on, I believe, their Escape album, which was on their, Don't Stop Believing album, one of their biggest. But when those lyrics come in that scene with my mom, it looks like it was written for that scene. And so I was actually listening to that song during that time in my life, and it helped me feel connection. That somebody sees me, they understand me, they've been through this too. And it almost felt like it was written for me. I adopted it for me. And then there was fighter songs, like, the opening of Survival of the Fittest, part 3 of the book is Survival of the Fittest. And that's when I, took control of my life and everyone else's life and became the adult. And here I am, I'm 14 going into my freshman year. Was I 15? Yeah, 15, the majority of my freshman year. But it starts out with, it's Survival of the Fittest is the name of the entire part of the book, but I forget what the first chapter is, but the song is the anthem, Here I Go Again on My Own, Whitesnake. But those songs the lyrics are exactly, you're in it with me because you realize, wow, how did this match this so much? That was a gift the Lord gave me, that I can integrate those songs. Again, there's a lot of Christian contemporary amazing music that will speak to your heart and your soul, which also matches very difficult times with their songs of hope and songs of redemption and songs of love and grace and courage. Songs, it takes a lot of courage.
I just had this vision that, the idea that this may become a screenplay at some point, and, thinking in the movie, those songs playing in the background, and as the actors play out the scenes just came to me. So I'll just throw that vision out there because I can see that happening. But,
yeah.
When you read the book, listeners, when you read the book, you're going to hear story after story, and you're going to think, how does anybody get through even one of these? And there are just one after another and after another. Let's just share one. This is just maybe a minor one in the scheme of the whole thing, but it's one that I remember well. And it's the chili powder incident.
Yeah.
Tell that story. It's probably minor in the big scheme of what you've experienced in your life, but I think it's something that the audience, everyone could probably relate to.
Yeah. I've had a lot of people write me about that, and how just they're laughing at the same time. They're laughing, they're angry, they're compassionate, all of it in that just one little chapter. And that comes really early in the book. I think it's like the second chapter. So, we all have these things that are cultural in our families that get handed down, ways to discipline, or, when you're teething, this is what you do, and that type of stuff. So one of the ways to that, it was my grandmother, my dad's mother. And I believe they lived with my dad's mom for maybe 6 months to a year when they tried to get my dad grounded and stable. And my mom had just had me. So I definitely grew up. And I have a whole big Latin side of the family. So they speak Spanglish, and they have all these like Spanish ways of doing things. So the chili powder was a means of trying to get your child to behave, or if they did something wrong, kind of like soap in the mouth. You say a bad word, I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap. We've all heard that. So in our Latin family, it was you do something wrong, or you disobey, or you say a bad word, you put chili powder on the tongue. And it burns. So that was what she always said. If you want to get Heather to listen, because I was a very strong-willed child, as you'll see in the book. And I was about 4 years old at this time. And I don't want to give too much away, but my mom was dealing with my little brother who was just a baby, and he had colic and he had asthma, and it was a 24 hours, just all consuming job for her to bring him comfort. And I loved my little brother, wanted to play with my little brother. So my mom loved that I cared for him and kept him occupied when he was fine. But when he would fall asleep, and of course, I was starving for attention because of all the chaos that was going on. And all the focus was on my dad, who was so sick, and my brother, who was so sick. So here I am, a normal, high functioning, high energetic, full of personality 4-year-old that just go play, go play, go play. And so I wanted to wake him up after she took her hours to get him to sleep. So he finally gets to sleep, and he had these little squeezable mobile over his crib mittens. And, my mom was emphatic, do not go in there. You're not allowed in there. You stay out of that room. He needs to sleep, all of this stuff. And the first thing I wanted to do was go wake him up. It was almost like I had this this is a great time to draw attention to me. So I'm assuming that's what I was feeling at 4, that I was feeling that neglect. And I went to go and I woke him up, and my mom went into a complete panic and just really caved into all those heightened, uncontrollable emotions when you're angry as a parent, you're maxed out, you're tapped out, and you just lose it. I said she lost her shiz completely. So, she grabbed me and went into the kitchen and opened the pantry and fumbled through all the spices. I remember spices were falling out and things were falling out. And her anger was so evident, the energy coming from her body. I just remember feeling scared. And she, was very angry and forced my head back, and, you're going to take this chili powder, but not knowing that the little plastic barrier on top of the chili powder was missing. She must have peeled it off when she did a recipe. So half the bottle went down my throat. And that is when I began to gag and cough and vomit. And then she just freaked out and got scared and was crying and went running out of the house to try to find my dad, who, was up at the neighbors drinking away because he had a bad drinking problem in the beginning. And just the scene of me not wanting to be alone and being left in the kitchen and running after her and just standing on the driveway. I could see her at maybe 4 or 5 houses down. She's screaming at my dad, and my dad drops his beer bottle and it rolls all the way down the gutter and just kind of down by my feet and past my feet. And I have these vivid scenes of just knowing that I didn't know it was in that bottle, but I know that it caused a lot of problems, with my dad and with my mom. And so, and just the end scene of, when she comes in and she calms down and she finds common ground again and gives me a bath and has my brother on her lap, and everything is calm and peaceful. And there's a lot of focus and love on me, and just her crying and telling me she's sorry, and me feeling so happy and content, and the heat residing from my mouth and being in the bubbles and just all of that. But thinking back to what happens when we do things in a fit of rage and we're angry, and the lesson I saw from that, how important it is not to react in that moment. I speak to that, what that taught me, seeing that versus being bitter against my mom. That wasn't her intent to pour the chili powder down my mouth, but she also wasn't thinking very clearly. And she was reacting on all these very volatile emotions, at that time. I know many mothers have been through those kinds of moments. And so I really was seeing it from that perspective. And also kind of the endearing, funny part of the things that get handed down to you, like put tequila on her gums, put tequila on Heather's gums when she's teething. I think it's why I like margaritas so much now.
There's always a reason.
I do go for quality tequila, though.
It's got to be the best kind. So, one of the things that I had said to you many times as we walked through the story was that with what you experienced with 2 parents with mental illness and the control that we would love to have, they didn't have in the same way because of their illnesses, and the chaos of your life, the instability that you had, you really, any child in that situation really has two options. One is they follow that same route and go down that path, the same as their parents, or they choose something else. You chose something else. And I was always fascinated by what it was within you or outside of you that you tapped into that allowed you to take the path toward thriving.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that was? How can you describe that to the audience?
Well, there was always a fork in the road. And a lot of that, and I do speak to that in the book on why I made these little choices along the way. But I share the story. It's called Fear and Faith Collide. And that's in the first part of the book. That's the chapter. And how when my dad, he was a believer, he loved Jesus. He got me my first Bible. He loved to go to church. He loved God. He never blamed God. He also, as much as you believe in God, you believe in the devil. There's an enemy. There's you can't have good without bad. They both exist, and nobody wants to think about the bad. You kind of blame God when things happen instead of saying, well, there's also, we've got an adversary, we have an enemy. So when you choose to try to understand that, I was a very inquisitive child. I was always curious. I wanted to know things. I wanted to understand things. So I would go and do the research myself. I wouldn't always take what someone else's opinion was as face value. I would be like, I think there could be more. I want to know for me. I want to understand it all. I want to see all my options. So that was something that was innate in me. But the other thing is that when I was 7 and Faith and Fear Collide, I was in a Sunday school class, and the teacher told me about Jesus and how it was a personal relationship, and that it didn't matter where I came from or if my parents believed in Jesus or not, or if, I didn't have parents, or none of those things mattered, that the relationship is that personal, and you can be a child. You don't have to be a special age. So she broke it down so simply that it felt tangible to me. Like, you mean I can have this? I want that relationship, and Jesus is God, and trying to explain the Trinity is difficult for an adult, let alone a 7-year-old, that, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But I got it. I got enough of it to want it. And I shot my hand in the air and was like, I want that. And I said this prayer with her. So I know that, I had the Holy Spirit living in me, helping me, guiding me, prompting me to make decisions. And so when I would be in that crossroad, you can go this way, you can go this way, I would have that feeling of, will that serve you well in the end? Like, it sounds really good right now, and it might feel good, but it won't serve me well in the end. So I'm not going to take that. Now, other times I didn't, it was like, I was caught up in the emotion, and, I really don't care. I want to feel good right now, or, this might not be the best decision, but I'm going for it. And there was always consequences for that. So I learned from the consequences. So it was either I was learning from the consequences, so I'd make a better choice later, or I was choosing the road less traveled, and the one that felt like I was denying myself of something. Like, I should have been a very promiscuous girl based on, my history. I mean, any therapist will tell you that it's a miracle that I was the opposite. And you can see why it's making these choices, along the way. So that developed. And as you do that, you're exercising that wisdom muscle, that spiritual muscle, the way you would doing a bicep curl with a dumbbell. And it develops over time. And then I had little pockets, when I got to be teenage years, I would say from like 19 to 23, you'll read about life in the fast lane a little bit. It was the first opportunity I got to be a kid. I wasn't taking care. It was, I was being a little taken care of, and lost myself in that a little bit, but then regrouped pretty quickly. And so you see the journey isn't this linear process all the time. It's up and down. As a matter of fact, if you look on the Amazon reviews, a lot of people say it takes you on this roller coaster ride that you don't want to get off. And at the same time, you're feeling all the feels, your tummy's dropping, it's just so cool to see how people are feeling that, because that's what it felt like to me too. And it's also sometimes a couple steps backwards, and then you got to full throttle forward again. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's a matter of learning and hopefully refining along the way, and letting God refine you, trusting the Lord with a lot of things, believing God at his word. So if you open up the Bible and you read the scriptures, you got to believe what it says. It's not head knowledge, and it's not meant to just inspire you to feel good. It's actually a call to action. And I think that that's the big component of growth, is actually acting out on a lot of these things.
Yeah. And your faith is certainly, you write about it so all the way through the book. It's really a thread. It's really a foundation. It's more than a thread. It's a foundation of everything in your life, certainly in your story. And because you got that seed planted so young, it's pretty amazing how it was a very big part of the reason that you chose to thrive.
Huge. And one thing I want to say about that really quick is that, God created music. I mean, music, the Psalms, which people love the Psalms in the Bible, that's all music. That's what that is. And some people don't realize that. And music has been, from a very soothing thing from the beginning. And music it is all types of genres. It doesn't have to be Christian music. It can be rock and roll. It can be country. It can be pop. It can be indie. I mean, there's lots of different music where you're going to feel the Spirit of the Lord. You're going to feel that in your soul, even though you don't know exactly who God is or understand his character, understand who he is, because you've never opened a Bible or you've never gone to church. We're all created for a relationship with him, whether or not you believe him or believe in him. And so eventually when you begin to say, this could be, I don't really know about it. I'm kind of ignorant to it. So I'd like to find out and have the information, and then I'll decide. That's when your eyes open up to a lot of things. But music, I realized, was a gift from him, even in the form of Tom Petty or the Cars or Journey or Pat Benatar. All of these people are in the book, or Eric Church, or, Mercy Me, Lauren Daigle, Zach Williams. I mean, I can go on and on. For King and Country, they're a big one. And I got this, I don't know if you can see it, but it's my little music note, right? It's my little cleft, and on it says, "It is well with my soul." And that has been the anchor for me, is music grounded me, and it becomes well with my soul. And I think it does that for a lot of people, because that I'm getting that feedback that the music has just been incredible, and that they've never seen a book like this before. They've never seen music connected. It looks like a musical. Or a movie.
Let's put that out there. We could talk forever about the story. I want to encourage you listeners to go and get the book. If any of this is kind of sparking something within you, get the book. It's on Amazon. Heather, let's talk about what's next for you. Where do you go next?
Well, I see myself definitely on a podcast circuit like this, sharing the story and getting the word out, hopefully on some talk shows where people can connect. But also, mostly I see myself speaking to a large audience about how to thrive, how to go from surviving to thriving, having that kind of be the anthem in sharing how to do that. What are the tools in doing that? What does it take to be vulnerable? Giving them the courage to be vulnerable, knowing that they have someone rooting them on their side, on their team. I just launched my brand new website. So that just went live, and I will be promoting that. You can find me on Instagram, Heather Deffenbaugh. It's public. So that's where I put a lot of my information. But the website is going to be key for people to sign up and get a weekly newsletter. I'm going to be developing Heather's Healthy Habits, and they're going to be based on 5 pillars of wellness, which is physical fitness. I've been a fitness instructor for 30 plus years, and I'm a holistic nutritionist. I've done transformation programs, as a coach and personal trainer. So I'm going to integrate all that in with the wisdom that I have learned in my 52 years of taking this journey, with from ashes to beauty, how people can have their ashes be developed into beauty. So those 5 pillars are physical fitness, physiological fitness, what's happening in the body, the hormones, the gut health, all that stuff. Mental fitness, mental's huge, emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness. So those 5 pillars of health are essential. And when one is not doing well, you're off balance. So it's not just about getting a 6-pack and looking good on the outside when the whole inside's falling apart, right? And it's not feeling good on the inside and letting the outside fall apart. So it's really, if you want wholeness, if you're looking for wholeness, that's what I want to help people guide them to. I want to guide them to that space. I mean, obviously I'm just the guide. They have to do the work, but the website will be key. The speaking engagements will be key. There will be another book. Yeah, I have the collaborative book coming out with a bunch of other fitness authors, and that book will launch in October. So that is an exciting book. And people want to hear more. A lot of people still be writing another book, so that will come. But I think From Ashes to Beauty will be kind of on tour for the next year or so, and we'll see what happens with that. I've heard a lot of people say it needs to be a movie, so we'll find the right producer and right director, and hopefully we'll see that on either the big screen or Netflix or something of that sort.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see where it goes as well. And I will make sure that all of your contact information and the website are in the show notes for everybody. So check those out if you want to follow Heather and see what she's up to. And before we close out today, Heather, I like to ask every one of the authors what the phrase that actually is the title of this podcast means to them. And it's called It Just Takes One. So close us out by telling us what It Just Takes One means to you.
It just takes one step forward and one brave act of courage to change the trajectory of your life. Yeah. You just need to move forward and take that one risk, that one step.
Yeah. That one conversation at idea.
One conversation. That's right. And that will snowball. It was my one conversation with you, Kelly, that sparked the whole thing. And from there, I kept saying that it's one day at a time. So every time I saw the big picture, I'd get a little anxious, like, how am I going to get to there? And I'm like, what has to happen today? What has to happen today? Just take that one step. And I have to keep doing that. It doesn't end after you finish the book and you publish your book, because now the book is this catalyst for me speaking and connecting with people all over the world. I'd love to connect with so many people, and that can feel overwhelming. So, I'm going to partner with a nonprofit coming up very soon, and that's going to be huge. And it's, hopefully going to give me the opportunity to speak at churches. And then I want to be able to do a TED Talks. I want to be able to speak, there's no limit. And there's no genre. This isn't just for a Christian audience. This is for a non-Christian audience. This is for a human being.
Yeah, for human beings. One step at a time.
One step at a time.
Thank you so much, Heather. It has been a really amazing experience to be working with you. I appreciated every moment. I wish you all the best as you go forward. And I know we'll still keep in touch.
Absolutely. I need Kelly in my life.
Same. And I need Heather in mine. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And listeners, go out and buy the book. It's available on Amazon now.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds great.
Such a fascinating story, right? I know you got bits and pieces, and there is so much more when you actually purchase the book that Heather went through in her life. But I think the overriding message that I take from Heather and from her story is that there is hope. That no matter how dark it gets, no matter how hard life is, there is always a way out. And to get out, you need to have some tools. She shared some of the tools that she used: therapy, for example, and music, and of course, her faith. And maybe one of the most surprising tools for her, the tool of writing. The power that comes from sitting down and writing your story, and the cathartic experience that can be. I hope you'll read more of her story by going to Amazon and purchasing her book. I'll put the link in the show notes below. And if you are someone who has wanted to share your story or has been told that you have a story worth sharing, please get on our website, scriptorpublishinggroup.com, set up a consult with us so we can talk about it and see if we might be able to help you also get that story down on paper. As always, thank you for joining me for this episode of It Just Takes One, and stay tuned for more of our authors and their stories coming soon.